Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, Ed. We were talking outside that this is quite a complex film, and one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of it is because it's not just about child abuse. It also issues of memory, identity, of moral questions about do we tell the truth? Do we hide the truth? You know, did you know about the complexity of all these different all these different themes getting into the subject? Yeah.
Can I just say a massive thank you? It's amazing to see so many people here. It really is. And to be in this extraordinary venue, and for hosting it, we really, really appreciate it. I'm really sorry Alex and Marcus aren't here. This is the first time we've done a screening where they're not sat up here with me. So I'll do my best to kind of talk. I can talk for myself. I can't really talk for them, but I know how they feel about the film and how they answer questions, so I'll do my best to kind of represent them. So I first heard about this story five and a half years ago. There was an article in a British newspaper, and I think, like a lot of people who would have read that article, I was kind of blown away by the themes that this story offers up. Themes that aren't actually to do with abuse, they're to do with brotherhood and love and survival, and as you suggest, like for me, ultimately, the things we do in order to survive, and how sometimes it's easier to believe a lie than to admit the truth. And one of the things I did when I first met them was kind of what I always do with people, not contributors or subject matter, but real people, which is how I see Alex and Marcus, which was to make a promise to them that I'll tell their story truthfully and with the sensitivity that it deserves. And the one thing they asked me to do was to not make an abuse film, to not make the abuse film. And I really hope that, albeit that the film has to talk about difficult and complicated issues and rightly talks about abuse, that also audiences, that you guys leave hopefully with a feeling of hopefulness and inspiration that these guys have survived, and they steadfastly refuse to be defined as victims, and they live extraordinary lives. And what you don't see in the film, but I'm so proud to share with people, is that they're extraordinary people in real life, and they're amazing husbands and fathers, and they live emotionally rich lives, and they haven't let this define or ruin their life. And I found that to be extraordinarily inspiring, and that's because of all the other themes that their story offers up.
You make a bold choice from the get-go to show us that the setup where we're going to listen to them it's an artificial, it's a place that you created, a set. You know, can you tell us about that choice?
So I've been making documentary films for 8-9 years, and my strong belief, and it's not everyone's belief, but my belief is that all films of this nature are, to a lesser or greater degree, constructs. And I think it's more honest and transparent to be open about the artifice. And I felt it was important to kind of show you the space that we'd created, an artificial space that we'd created for this conversation to happen. And I wanted to show you the lights, and I wanted to show you them walking in, and I wanted to kind of own the fact that it is a construct, and yet within that space they have full agency. And that was always the most important thing for me, given the story and the subject matter, is that they were going to do this at their pace, that they could always walk out, that they could stop, that they didn't have to say anything that they didn't want to say, but if they did want to talk, I was there and I would listen. And that always felt important, that they were empowered to tell their story, and we were just privileged enough to be on the other side of the camera, but they were driving the process.
So the book came out, and the story of the mother it wasn't dealt. You know, they didn't dive into the truth of what happened. Am I correct?
So they wrote a book about 6 years ago, and some of the details of the abuse and what happened came out in the book. But the way they talk about it is that what happened was that Alex suddenly learnt that this happened and this happened and this happened, and his imagination then filled in the gaps and went to the worst possible place. And so the book was a kind of stepping stone to what you see on the film, but in some ways the book made Alex's journey more difficult because his brother gave him, you know, through duress, a little bit of information, but didn't give him everything. And Alex's position was then very, very difficult. And Marcus talks very openly about, he knew when he wrote the book that he gave his brother what he thought his brother needed, but he knew deep down that he hadn't given him actually what he deserved. And he knew that deep down he would have to have the conversation that you see in Act 3. And they often talk about, it's very difficult to try and explain what it must feel like to be an identical twin, but they say that you can have a 100% relationship with your sibling, but with an identical twin, you have 110%. There's that extra little bit, whatever that is. And that sort of indefinable extra 10% was the thing that got lost, and the thing that was destroyed in a way because of the secrets and the lies and the deception. And I hate to sort of use the word closure because it can sound so pat and so trite, but what you see on screen there is actually them getting that last 10% back. And after they hugged, we left them and they went to the pub. Apparently, I didn't go with them. They went to the pub, and Alex said to his brother, "Look, are we done?" And his brother said, "Yeah, we're done." And that was the only thing they've ever said about what you see in the film. They've never talked about it since, but they do feel as though something has come back in their relationship, and it's been very profound to see that.
As a filmmaker, you're approaching the story, and the mother does not have a voice. How was that? Made it easier? Did it make it more difficult? The fact that you didn't have the voice of the mother.
I mean, it turned it into a film. I felt very strongly that we could never, and we shouldn't try to delve into trying to understand why she became the person she did, because no one knows. And Alex and Marcus weren't able to ask their mum why she did the things she did, because she died before Marcus admitted to Alex what had happened to them, and certainly before the accident they were never in a place to talk. So it was a different kind of film because of that. But the other thing which I was really struck by when I first met them 5 or 6 years ago is they said, we don't want to make an abuse film, and we don't want to make a film that demonizes our mother. Despite what they'd gone through, and despite all the pain and the hurt and the shame and the fear that what she did to them has instilled in their lives, they were still refusing to play that card and just make a film. And I think that says a lot about them. It doesn't say anything about her. It says a lot about the kind of people they are. And I really hope, as a result of that the film is about much more than her or what she did and the impact it had on them. It's also about the fact that through their relationship, they have managed to survive.
Did you understand from the get-go, approaching the story, that, I mean, it's remarkable that it's so complicated, the fact that you have one character who needs to forget, and you have one character who desperately wants to remember. Did you understand that dynamic and that conflict?
Yeah, because that I spent a lot of time with them. I mean, we tend to do a lot of things in England in the pub, and so over like 4 years, I would spend a lot of time just sitting with them, drinking, and getting to know them. And the more I started to talk to them, the more it was like it played out. The retrospective story, you know, not even Act 3, but the story that had already happened, just played out like this psychological thriller, this drama, where the thing that one person needed was desperately the thing that the other person couldn't give him. And yet it was true. That was what was remarkable to me. It was one of those kind of stranger than fiction stories. But there were a couple of kind of key moments in those 4 or 5 years. And in a way, the fact that we had a long period before we ever pulled a camera out of a bag was really helpful, because it allowed us to build genuine trust. And, you know, as I said before, I don't, with anyone I make a film about, anyone who lets me in, I don't see them as subject matter. I just hate that word. I see them as a human being. They're Alex and Marcus, and now they're my friends, and I'm very proud to call them that. But I did find at the beginning, we'd spend, the 3 of us would go and sit in the pub, and they would talk, but they weren't talking openly at all. And then I started to spend time with just Alex and just Marcus, and it was kind of amazing that as soon as we were on our own, they just talked about these issues with a degree of freedom. That there was clearly a fear of talking to me about the other twin. You know, it was almost like they felt like they were being disloyal to their relationship if they would say anything critical about their other twin. And with Alex, who lost his memory, I would often, you know, he would tell me about the next chapter of his life and this amazing story, and he would often end by saying, you know, the crazy thing is I've just told you that, but I've never told my brother that. We've never talked about this. And similarly with Marcus, you know, a couple of years ago, before we started filming, I said to him, look, why do you really, really want to make this film? Because it's going to be very, very difficult, and it's going to be painful. And he went very quiet and looked at me and said, I don't want to be silent anymore. And there was a sense for us as filmmakers that they wanted to have a conversation. They didn't know how. they hadn't yet found the strength to, but there was a desire to, there was a recognition that there was something missing in their relationship, there was a gulf of understanding, and there was a desire to have a conversation. And so all the decisions we made were all about how do we create a safe place, a studio, a very artificial studio in which they can have that conversation. And you know, quite a lot of people have asked us like why it's so sterile, why it sort of looks like so clinical, and it's not going to be for everyone. Some people won't like that setup that we've created, and that's okay. But it was a conscious decision on my part that they haven't had the conversation in the real world ever, and there's a reason for that. And only they know the reason. But to try to pretend that we were just we were in their kitchen or in their house listening in on that conversation after 30 years, I think would have just been. It would have been a lie. It would not have been truthful. And I felt actually go as far the other way as possible, create a space which feels totally artificial, which feels totally sterile, and use that as a space that they can inhabit, that they can feel safe in. And I think walking into that studio and walking away from the real world actually allowed them to disclose rather than made them kind of tighten up and be quiet.
One of the things that we talked about outside that I greatly commend you and both Alex and Marcus about is that, you know, we usually associate abuse in disadvantaged environments and with you know, poor people. And here you're articulating a story of an affluent family and that there is abuse in it, and we don't usually see that story.
It's something that Marcus especially is really passionate about. You know, he wants this film to start a conversation, and what he's done, I think, is remarkably brave. And one of the things he often talks about is that abuse happens a lot more than any of us would like to admit. And it happens in every strata of society, all over the world. And unless we're willing to be honest about that and talk openly about that, it will keep going. Because the thing that allows it to flourish is silence. And one of the things that I've learned from spending time with Marcus and being privileged enough to interview him on camera for this film is those. If you've been abused as a child, those feelings of shame and fear and guilt can make you silent for days and weeks and months and years, and in their case, decades of being too scared to talk out about what had happened to them. And I think what they've done here is an extraordinary gift to people. And they always said if one person can watch the film and can find the strength to go and talk about trauma that they've been through with someone that they trust, that would be an extraordinary impact. And after the first screening we had at Telluride, someone came up to them and said that similar things had happened in their childhood, and they'd never told anyone, and they'd been inspired by what they'd done, and they were going to go and talk. And waves and waves of people would wait after screenings and hug them and say thank you, and it's been very overwhelming to witness that. And for Marcus especially, he says that every time someone gives him a hug, he feels a little bit lighter, and he feels a little bit less like he's to blame or he's the guilty one, and that this burden he's had on his shoulders just gets a little bit lighter to carry every time. So it's been amazing.
So many questions crossed through my mind when I was watching the film, and one of them was the responsibility of the filmmaker. You know, can you tell us, is that something that crossed your mind when you were making the film? Your responsibility?
Yeah. So when I first met them, I was 27, and Simon Chin, the producer, and we had a lot of conversations about whether I was old enough, mature enough, good enough to tell this story correctly. And I think one of the reasons we waited, or it was helpful that it took a long time, and I was able to get a little bit older and go through a few more life experiences of my own and pick up a few more filmmaking skills along the way. One of the things we did do to prepare was spend time with therapists, and so I would spend quite a lot of time with two different therapists in London in the lead up to the interviews, and I would talk to them about, I asked them, look, if these guys had come to you seeking professional help, how would you talk to them? How would you guide them through the process safely? How would you avoid re-traumatization? And if there were flashbacks, how would you make sure that wasn't dangerous for them? And that process was so helpful to me, and it gave me practical skills that proved invaluable when kind of guiding them through the process. And I felt then that I was equipped to lead us all through this journey safely. And the other thing that the therapy sessions taught me was there's a therapeutic idea called the frame, and it relates to this in as much as the frame is often seen as the kind of the space, the geographic space in which therapy can happen, in which a therapeutic relationship can be formed, in which disclosure can happen. And that was one of the sort of motivating reasons for making this studio space. We were creating a frame, creating a space that was otherworldly, was not part of the normal world, in which they could come into, they could own, and they spent a lot of time there the week before the interviews and would walk around and sit down and feel comfortable and figure out where the water was and the toilets, and they came to own that space and feel like it was a place that they could do something that they hadn't done before.
And I also read that during production, your wife was pregnant. Yeah. How did that affect the process?
So I got married a couple of months ago, and then we have our first little kid on the way. And it's been when we first found out we were pregnant, and then I went back into the edit room and I watched the film. I found it very, very difficult, and it was the first time in the process of editing where I sort of like had to leave and go out, and because obviously the film brings up issues of parenthood, and yeah, I was in a very emotionally heightened state. But I don't know whether, like, if I'd made the film now, whether it'd be different. But I'm pleased that I made the film at the same time as starting to become a parent. And what's been amazing, I said it earlier, but Alex and Marcus both have kids, and they are remarkable parents. They're remarkable fathers, and they admit that they probably dote on their kids too much, and they probably spoil them too much because they're desperate not to give them any of the things that happen to them, obviously, but seeing the way they are with their kids, despite what they've gone through, and seeing just this outpouring of love and the focus for both of them on family being at the center of their lives is really inspiring. I think it'll make me a better parent. I
could have used that ugly word closure, but after you filmed the film, you mentioned that there was closure, which is totally understandable. What was it like for them to see the final product?
So they say that they really had no idea what the film was going to be. And I think unless you're in the industry, it's very hard to know how a project like this comes together, because they gave us a load of photographs. Obviously, you see all those photographs on the screen, but they didn't really know how we were going to build it, how we were going to construct it. And the first time we showed it to them, it was before we finished the edit, because we wanted to get their feedback. And it was really difficult because in the film, they both say things about each other that they'd never said to each other's faces. And especially Alex talking about the anger that he felt at his brother's lie, that sense of betrayal, wasn't something they'd ever discussed. And we were sitting there, the three of us, and it was really, really difficult to sit through that for them. And we had to stop the film twice, I think. And when Marcus gives that extraordinary speech at the end of the film, when he talks about what had happened to him and the way it made him feel, he left it again at that point. And I think for the first 3 or 4 screenings of this film, he got up and left. He couldn't sit through it. He didn't remember doing it. He didn't remember it at all. And he talks about it. It's so beautiful what he says, and it's so erudite. And he just talks about this. It's not something he'd ever thought about or tried to think about what he would say the night before. It was just like that. Those feelings were just sitting in him for decades, and it all came up in that incredible moment for him. And even now, when we sit there and we try and go to all the screenings together, and I always sit next to him. And for the first 15, I would sort of put my arm on his shoulder in that bit, and like he visibly shakes when that moment comes up, and it's clearly it's very, very raw for him still. But he should be incredibly proud. He should be incredibly proud, because anyone who talks on camera is much braver than I am, and I think he's done a remarkable thing.
You bring up editing. You have so many shots that appear multiple times, and we see it from Marcus' perspective and Alex's perspective. Tell us about the editing process of all those multiple shots.
So we talked the way we made the film was we shot the interviews first, and we edited the interviews into a pretty much a 90-minute film, like you see, and then you're forced to as a filmmaker to work out how else do I bring this story to life visually, and so we opted for reenactments is kind of a dirty word in the documentary industry, and I don't think what we've done here is that. I don't like to think of it as that. We're trying to find textures and tones to bring to life some of the states of mind that Alex feels when he wakes up from the coma in Act 1, and try to allow you to experience that sort of extraordinary feeling that he must have felt of nothingness and fear and isolation. But in Act 2, the drama's trying to do something different, and as you say, there are these repeat shots. One of the things I've always found really fascinating is even though they've spent the last 20 years talking to each other and they're very close, there was this massive gulf of understanding. And we all know what it's like when two people go to the same event and they're watching exactly the same thing happen, but their emotional interpretation of what that event means is radically different. And one of the most painful things for me to hear was Marcus talking about his mum's birthday party, and he brought it up many, many times in the interviews. And they would go to this birthday party, and he would have to watch his brother go and hug his mum and kiss his mum, and they would sing happy birthday, and he'd be sitting at the back sort of thinking, if only you knew, and that must have been, I can't even imagine how painful that must have been. And so this idea of seeing an event and having very different emotional reactions was something that we wanted to explore, and so we had these repeat shots. There's that shot of the beds, and I wanted to keep coming back to it 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and every time you see that same shot, you know a little bit more about what's happened to them, and you're forced as an audience, hopefully, to reevaluate what that shot means, and hopefully it sort of narratively resolves itself at the end. But yeah, that was the idea.
And how did you arrive? I thought it was very powerful, the symbols of the two beds and the changing shapes on the beds, and also you keep beautifully going back to the two windows, and one of them is slightly different from the other. The symbols that recurred through the film are very powerful.
I'm sort of interested. I made a short film last year called Black Sheep that was very stripped back. It was one single headshot interview and some drama, and it would often just...
It was nominated for the Oscar, right?
Somehow, yeah. Got,
somehow, yeah.
But we made it because we were waiting to make this, and we were trying some of the techniques out for that I think the ones that I think worked we brought into this. But it was very, again, it wasn't for everyone, but it was very stripped back. It was kind of very minimalist, and I wanted to try and figure out how do we tell this story as simply as possible. How do we boil it down to its essence and use visuals that in this case that are sort of symbolic and suggestive. And I sort of found that at the beginning of projects, there are always a couple of ideas or images that come to me, and I try not to lose those. I try not to forget them. That feels like the sort of seed of that's the acorn of the project, and I think you have to kind of be truthful to them in some respect. And that top shot of the beds was one of those, and it's sort of like a womb. That was the idea, and I liked the symmetry, and we worked hard to recreate that. Yeah.
You were not able to shoot in the real location. Can you tell us about that, and then the choice of finding an alternate? Yeah.
So the house that they were brought up in, Duke's Cottage, we tried to film there, and I think for totally understandable reasons, the people that now own the house didn't want us to film there. So that was we understood, and actually, frankly, Alex and Marcus didn't want to go back there hugely. They did go back and they met the people that lived there, but they found it very, very difficult. And the house had been totally refurbished and modernized. So we had all these photographs of the house, and we then spent quite a lot of time trying to find a house that was as similar as humanly possible to their real house. And we worked with an amazing production designer, and we gave her all of these photos. And when we first showed Alex and Marcus the film, one of the first things they said wasn't about the emotions or any of their things that they said. They were like, wow, that looked just like the house. And they were quite freaked out by it. And we found the house, we gutted it completely and brought in all new furniture, I think, bar a table. So everything you see in there is brought in deliberately to match all the fabrics, all the textures, all the curtains. We're trying to get as close as possible to how the house actually was.
have the wives seen the film, and what have been their reaction to the film?
Marcus's wife has,
and Alex's wife.
I think it's been a really difficult process for them. Alex often talks in Q&As about when Alex got married to his wife bought into the journey. They didn't yet know about all the details, but he was on a journey at that point to find himself. And his wife has been, as you see in the film, just an extraordinary support. In those years when he was seeing his brother every day, but his brother wasn't able to provide emotional support, his wife saved him, really. And Marcus's wife is different, because when Marcus's wife married Marcus wasn't telling anyone what had happened, and so there wasn't a story for Marcus. And so they come from very different perspectives, and they're really proud, I think, of what these guys done, and I think they should be here.
And has a discussion been done about their children, and how are they going to share their story about the grandma? And
yeah, it's a difficult one for me to talk. I can't really talk for them, but Alex has said, what Alex says to this is that he doesn't want to be silent to his kids about this. You know, that you have to speak out, and ultimately, I think his kids will inevitably, when they're old enough to watch this with real context, they will be immensely proud of what their dads have done. And you know, it's obviously complicated, but I think they feel strongly that they don't want to be silent anymore, because that's the thing that allows abuse to continue and to people to get away with it. And it's taken a lot for Marcus to do what he's done, and Alex, and even, this isn't straight to your question, but making a film like this is difficult emotionally, but then sharing it with the world, and especially given that it was on Netflix, you know, suddenly on the push of a button, it's extraordinary. It goes out to 150 million homes or something amazing. And what's been so wonderful for us is we've spent a couple of weeks over here with the twins, and they have completely owned the process and owned the film, and they're so proud of what this is and what they've done, and there are nerves involved with lots of people suddenly seeing their story, but I think greater than that for them is a genuine feeling of having done something which might make a difference, and that's worth it.
Well, and so have you, and it's a really, really important story that people need to see. And we've got the opportunity to see it in this theater and share a conversation with you, but it's also incredible that Netflix, people can watch it in the safety of their own home and experience it. It has to be seen. It has to be.
And our collaboration with Netflix has been truly amazing. It's the first film I've made with Netflix, and I feel like they, at every stage, have encouraged us to make the very best version of the film that we set out to make, and we felt just incredibly supported. And I've made lots of films in the past that I'm immensely proud of, that have taken years to make, and 10 people have seen it. Like, not even all my family have seen some of the films I've made. And then you make this, and it can go out and just reach people in a way that is almost impossible to do otherwise. And with this film in particular, given that we do want it to have an impact and do want it to get it seen and hopefully, you know, have a positive impact on people, to have Netflix behind us it's been amazing.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for
Thanks
making
so much.
this film. What an honor.